We'll start recording. All right, good afternoon, and I appreciate you all being here for the November State of the Market Economic and State of our Industry update. As always, I spend my time studying the data and the trends so that you don't have to. And the goal of this call is to simplify what's happening in the economy, simplify what's happening in the markets, and bring that to you in a way that is as milk and cookies as we possibly can. And our goal with that is to help make sure that you become the local economist of choice. And understanding the market, understanding the trends, being able to interpret what's happening for your consumers when they're concerned, when they don't know what to make of things. Like, for instance, we've had 2 rate cuts in a row, and at both rate cuts, rates went up, not down. So why is that? Those are the types of things that we explore on this call today. So with that said, I'm going to share my screen and we will get diving in. So I'm very excited. Let me just make sure I can see all your smiling faces. There we go. I'm very excited that today we've got some of the data that we typically cover, and we've got some new data in here that we've not covered before that is fresh out of NAR, and just a little bit of consumer trends and consumer behavior. So with that said, let me dive in here. Okay. Oops, there we go. As you know, I am Brian Wentz. I'm the OP for the KW Coastal Living offices in Inglewood and in Lakewood Ranch. My contact information is on there. I know we have some guests on the call, and welcome. We're glad you're here. We want our industry to be elevated. So this information, in the spirit of abundance, we want you to take this back into your own businesses. Now, before we get started, I do want to acknowledge we had an unfortunate incident with one of our employees in our related mortgage company this last month. And I just want to touch on this really briefly. That was an unfortunate circumstance, obviously caught us all by shock. And our mortgage partner is obviously typically a big part of this call. We, in the interest of transparency, we had the ability to really look back at what happened and assess. And we also recognized that the actions of one employee did not really represent us as an organization. It was something that occurred in their own time. All that said, it also highlighted a cause that I've spent the last decade and a half working with children 11 to 17 and 18 to 30-year-olds to help them experience their best life. And so recognizing that we had choices to either run from what happened or actually face it head on, we decided that some of the events are going to cause us to, as a partnership, lean into what happened, and we've made a fairly sizable donation to the Safe Children's Coalition and the Sarasota County Sheriff's Foundation. That is a mouthful. So just so that you guys know that Echelon Howard Kaplan is still operating as our loan originator, and thanks to you guys, we have several additional loan originators that you have brought to us that we want to be in business with. So if there's someone out there that you just like working with that's looking for an opportunity, let us know. Some of our best leads come from you, and if you need to fast track, Howard is still working those leads, and his contact information is on there so that you have that. With that said, let's talk about what has happened since our last call. And I tell you, I feel like I say this every month. It's been a roller coaster between tariffs, government shutdowns, reports that don't get released on time, just all of the factors that have been happening out there. There's a lot of static and a lot of noise. And so today we're going to kind of unwind the perspective on that and give you some predictions of what to expect for next year. So a couple of the things that really have been impacting us in this last 30-day cycle. And by the way, for anyone on the call, if you have questions, do not hesitate to put in the chat. Kennedy and McKenna will moderate and make sure that they let me know that if there's something that we need to touch on. First of all, we just got off the largest or the longest U.S. government shutdown in history. And the challenge with that is that a lot of the economic data that comes out on a regular cycle did not come out. If I'm being honest, it was a little bit of a hit to our industry as a housing industry in that there probably was some data that was going to be very pro-housing coming out, especially in the jobs reports, that in some cases got skipped, and we learned today that one of those reports just may not ever get produced. So we're in a little bit of a vacuum on that. The September jobs report was released this morning at 8:30 a.m. So I've got the updated information on that in here. And of course, last month we did not have a jobs report. The mortgage rates this month, they've been reacting to the events of the market, but they've been very mild. And if we look back, when we get to the mortgage rate slides, we talk about what happened even as early as January of this last year, or of 2025. There was a lot of volatility. The mortgage rates and spreads were really bouncing around a lot. Things have settled down. The market kind of sees what's coming and is absorbing the possibility of a rate cut or not rate cut, the transition of Jerome Powell. There's just a lot of things that they've got some horizon, and so things are a little bit calm, which we're happy, and that's good for mortgage, and that's good for real estate. 10-year Treasury. So this month, we had to use some what we call third tier data. In other words, we go to data sources that we don't usually go to as a primary headline number. And so we did have some ADP data that actually showed that jobs probably in October were down. And we'll talk about that a little bit. Inflation's been pretty well under control. It's remaining at about that 3% level. It's about 1% higher than the Fed wants. The Fed wants to keep stable employment, and they want to keep stable inflation. And typically they want to see inflation a little closer to that 2% range. So with tariffs, that is still affecting how that inflationary number reacts. And there's a couple of other things that may change that in the months ahead. Here's the kicker. The Fed, ever since the last open market committee meeting, has been really indicating that they are not wanting to make an additional December cut. Not having the data that was available, that would have normally been available due to the shutdown, was a little bit of a setback, and it left a void. And even Jerome Powell's comments at the last meeting kind of talked a little bit about that. So we'll review that. Right now, the chances of a December cut are about 36%, so about 1 out of 3, and that's not looking real good. The next jobs report, of course, we talk a little bit about it's labor over inflation right now. So the Fed is really focusing on the softening job market, even over inflation. And so those job reports, when they come out, is really critical. And unfortunately, due to the shutdown, the next job report got pushed all the way to December 16th. And the problem is that's a week after the Fed meets, which means they're not going to have any fresh data, which, again, it's labor over inflation. So therefore, we probably, that reduces the likelihood of seeing another Fed cut in December. A couple of other just administration factors that are out there. Trump announced today that he's going to nominate Jerome Powell's replacement. His term is up, I believe it's May, June, that time frame this year. So Jerome has been very hawkish and has been, even though he was a Trump appointee, has been in a brouhaha with Trump since he got back into office. And so Trump has a desire to see faster rate cuts, and probably the nominee that he puts in there, who I think will be Waller, I'm not sure, that will probably be a little bit more of a pro-housing appointee as opposed to Jerome Powell, but it remains to be seen. We also have the Supreme Court case pending on the Trump tariffs, and the implication of that is that if it's determined that he did not have the authority to be able to pass some of the tariffs that have been passed, those would be repealed, and that would probably start to bring that inflation number down faster, which has, consequences both good and bad, and yet that's something that we're watching really closely. Last two things that are good for our industry is mortgage purchase applications are on the rise. And I know we've got some other people that are in the mortgage industry, and I see Kelly shaking her head. So mortgage purchase applications are in double-digit increase year-over-year territory, and that's always an indication of things to come. And the last thing, existing home sales are on the rise, and I'm going to apologize. I have the updated data, and I just realized as I saw that I might not have included that in today's overall picture. So one of the really big pictures, or one of the really big factors this month, is just mortgage rates and where they are. October rates fell down to about 6 1/8, and then they bounced back up to about 6.375. Of course, in October we had a 25 basis point cuts, but the press conference was what we call a wet blanket on the industry. Jerome Powell asked the question, what do you do when you're driving in fog? And he said, you slow down so you don't make mistakes. And the markets did not interpret that well. They really took that as a little bit more of a hawkish position as opposed to a move towards a little bit more neutral territory in terms of rate policy. So at the time he said, don't count on December cuts. The market at that point had really priced in 2 December cuts. And we'll talk a little bit about spreads and how those work, but the market was expecting to see 2. So the implication of that is we could see rates a little bit higher at the end of the year than what we expected. But again, so much of what happens is really the 10-year Treasury markets as opposed to the Fed policy. So we'll talk about that a little bit. So those are some of the big factors that we're looking at. This is the good news. January 6th, we had a high this year of a little over 7%. We came all the way down to 6.17 in October and 6.24 in November. So these are averages. 6 historically is a really good rate. And I know that when we were all used to in 2021 and 2022, these 2.875 rates, which were crazy, we're in a pretty good spot. So we do have an affordability issue, and we've talked about this in the past. The real income, like the real income growth, has only grown about 14% over the last 5 years, while the cost of ownership, especially when we were back at the beginning of the year, was up about 72%. So that's a big gap between the two. But the mortgage rates falling are helping both spur demand and helping helping with affordability, which is really the challenge that we have. Now, if we just zoom out, we look at 5 years, where have rates been? You see the challenge of the market that we're currently in, which is we're 3+ years into the lowest sales pace in U.S. history. So since 2005, we have had 72 million new household formation in the U.S. So when you take out household formation, it's actually the worst year that we've had in real estate the last 3 years since 2005. But when you figure that, or when you add in the fact that our population has grown, it's actually the worst years. We've had 3 of the worst years in the history of the United States in housing. So I say this every month. If it feels hard, it's because it's been hard. I've been doing this for 30 years. I went through the downturn in the 90s. I went through the downturn in 2008 through 11. This has been more challenging. So for you that are getting in the market today, if you can succeed today, you will succeed wildly in the future. And for those that are struggling, hang in there. We're about to turn the corner a little bit. I talked a little bit about this earlier. The Fed really is balancing inflation and labor, and they want to keep they want to keep labor at its highest level they can, and they want to keep inflation as close to 2% as they can. We've seen the jobs market softening, and all this really is in a milk and cookies way is as the economy grows, we add more workers, and that creates more jobs, and that makes our economy bigger. And that growth is our growth, GDP, gross domestic product. Well, we had a couple of really good months of job growth, and then boom, August hit, and we had a whole bunch of revisions downward, and I'll show you what those look like here in a moment. But in August, it showed that the economy actually shed about 4,000 jobs, which was a little bit of a shocker and a wake-up call for the entire economy. Now, here's the challenge. The shutdown meant that the September and the October reports, they just haven't been released. So we don't know what those say. We've got some ADP data that's third-party data that shows a little bit of a mixed signal, but again, that's not my favorite data source. This morning, we did get the September numbers at 8:30 in the morning, and it was a little bit of a shocker on the good side for the economy and probably on the bad side for housing market. The markets expected that we would have created about 50,000 new jobs. We were actually at 119, so it was a really hot number. Now, the thing to know about this is the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the BLS, the survey methods that they use for this are very imprecise. It relies on surveys that they send out to business owners to say, hey, what happened last month? But I don't know if you're like me. Sometimes that stuff sits on my desk and I just don't return it, or I return it late, which is why you see these big revision numbers where they have data that says, hey, the market's really good. And then all of a sudden they go, whoa, we revised everything downward. So again, the next jobs report will be December 16th, and that is going to be really, really key number in terms of determining where the first and the second quarter of 2026 goes. So if we just look at what this looks like on a month by month, this is data from Trading Economics, a site that I use for a lot of my charts. You can see here that we had negative job growth in June. July wasn't bad. August was revised downward, and September was 119,000. The thing to remember is that we typically are somewhere between about 220 to 240,000 new jobs created in a good market and a really healthy economy. So even 119 is still almost half. If we zoom out and look at what this looks like on the bigger picture, this is a 5-year employment trend. And of course, we track non-farm payroll because farm work is very seasonal in the US. You notice that arrow, it's pointing down. That means that the economy is slowing down. We're generating fewer jobs. It doesn't show that it's breaking. The market breaking would be you'd have 3 or 4 months in the yellow, like you see off to the July timeframe. So it's not breaking, but it is slowing a lot. And this is where the Fed has a desire to stay balanced with inflation, but also get ahead of the jobs because they don't want it to break. If it breaks, we probably tip over into a recession. This is what you hear when they talk about a soft landing, and that's what they're trying to balance. Now, at the same time, people are looking for a job. There's fewer jobs created. That kind of tells you we shed somewhere in the neighborhood of, I believe it's about 1 million jobs a year that get a month that get fired and then go look again for another position. So this cycle just always is continuing. And you notice the trend in unemployment. The Fed has a goal to keep unemployment at around 4%. Well, we crept up again in September to 4.4. This number is pretty accurate. So this one is not one that gets revised. So as a result of that, you can start to see that unemployment is growing. And again, that's a sign that the labor market is softening. And that's what the Fed's going to look at. Now, if we just jump back, again, I always think these charts are important to give perspective. So if we jump back and we look at the 10-year, we see that April of 2020, we all remember COVID and all the crazy things that were happening at that point. We had a high of 14.9% unemployment. You can see how from the 2015 to 2020 range, that unemployment had actually been falling. And if I were to just kind of draw this line, you'd see it's kind of going down right here. Well, since June of 2022, we've started to see that unemployment climbing. And again, this is a sign that probably in 2026, it's a sign that we'll probably see an easing of the federal funds rate and a little bit more accommodative policy, which would be very good for housing. I think it's important to note that the Fed, I say this kind of with love, but the Fed doesn't really care about the housing market itself. It's not one of their primary focuses or objectives. So the challenge that we've been in is that every other industry, and especially any financial services industry, has been in a massive expansion the last couple of years. And there are a lot of industries that are winning at a really high level. Real estate is not one of them, and nor is mortgage. And so while everyone else has been going up, we've been going down. And the Trump administration understands that the housing industry is 17% of the entire US economy. So that's why they're pushing so hard to bring rates down to just kind of get that demand spurred, get us back on track. So of course, with the jobs announcement this morning, rates ticked up a little bit, 6.36. However, as I was watching it throughout the day, because I'm a geek and that's what I do, things were settling in pretty good today. So the market didn't react to that jobs report as much as I thought maybe they would. Now, interest rates are linked to the 10-year treasury. And there's this concept of a spread of where's the 10-year, what's the difference that the investors put in as a buffer for risk, and then where does that leave the mortgage rates? So to just kind of walk through this a little bit, this month, the 10-year treasury dipped below 4%. And that's 3.8 is really a key technical level. When you get below 3.8, it starts to indicate that the bond market thinks that we might be headed towards a recession. So we're flirting with that really key level. But in October, things were really stable, which is something that we've not said the last several months. We were in the 3.9 to 4.15. That's a really tight range. It's very stable. And again, markets were still pricing in one more cut for the end of the year. So it depends on some of the economic data and what happens between now and then, where we end the year on rates. But the bond market, because they are so reactive to data, they really get ahead of the Fed in terms of rate cuts, in terms of jobless trends. So that 10-year treasury is really a really key thing just to watch. So if we just look at this was the last 1 year of the 10-year treasury, and you see April 4th, Liberation Day, when tariffs were announced, it took a major dip and then rebounded right back up. October, we got some weak jobs data, and that just shows you how we react to the economic news that's out there. We take a look at a 10-year. This shows a visual of the challenge that we created with uber low interest rates and the impact of inflationary environment, fast appreciating houses, and then high mortgage rates. So we hit a low in July of 2020 of basically 0.5% or 53 basis points on the 10-year treasury. Today we're at 4.1. That is a huge spread. And that is where, when you had a 2 or 2.5% spread, that's where you started to get your 2.875, your 2.625 interest rates that we saw back in the day, the crazy rates that we'll probably hopefully never see again. Now, as it relates to this, again, I talk a lot about mortgage spreads. I really want to educate you guys on how to understand this, because you can pay attention to where rates are headed based on what those spreads are looking like. Historically, in the U.S., the spread between the 10-year treasury and the 30-year rate been about 1.7%. So if we're at 4% on a 10-year note, we're going to be at about 5.7 on a rate. I noted down below here that about 40 to 45% of the 30-year fixed rate movement is just the 10-year treasury. The rest is what the Fed policy looks like. So we have this concept of the slow dance. I show this every month just to kind of demonstrate what this means for the people that haven't been on here before. But you've got the gray line is the federal funds rate. So when you hear the Fed cut or the Fed raised rates, that's the line we're talking about. And of course, between 2022 and 2024, it was the fastest increase in history dating back to the 80s. It was the fastest increase ever. The next fastest was the 1980 run-up, 79.80. So it was a unique time, but you'll notice the blue line is the 30-year fixed rate. The red line is the 10-year treasury. And you notice they just kind of move in unison. Sometimes they're a little closer, sometimes they're a little further away, but that movement, that sort of swaying together, that's the slow dance of what we call the spreads. And there have been times where the spreads have been very tight, like in this 2021, 2022 period. Then June of 2022 hit and the spreads got worse. This is also why when the 10-year treasury hit 5% last year, and we had about 18 months ago, and we had a 3% spread, that's where we got our nearly 8% interest rate from. So what does that mean for you? Well, right now the spread's about 2.2%. That means if we just got back to a normal market, or a market where the economy, you can kind of see what's coming. And what I mean by that is the 2013 through the 2018 economy, it was boring. There was no news. Everything was the same. Nothing changed. Every day was just, same old, same old. We just haven't been that way since about 2020. So with normal spreads, we could see rates in the 5.6 to 5.875, even without any change in the federal funds rate. So I think that's important to know. What we know from history is that when interest rates get below 6.4 and they stay there for duration, meaning somewhere in the 10 to 13 week period, so 2 to 3 months, you will start to see mortgage purchase demand pick up massively. And then, of course, we'll talk about how long it takes to find a house. On the heels of that, we then see resale properties starting to pick up. So if we just look at what does this mean for your buyers? Well, in January, we were 7.125. We've been flirting around the 6 1/8 on a quotable rate, on a typical rate. So that's a savings on the median priced house at 20% down. That's a savings about $254 a month, which translates into $3,000 a year. And that's a 10.4% savings, which means a buyer can afford about $52,000 more purchasing power in December or in October. I'm sorry, yeah, what month is it? November, than we could in January. So that gives buyers a little bit more power, and that helps ease that challenge. So if we just kind of take a look at what are some talking points that we could use, and this is just an approximation, but for buyers, you can say, hey, we've got some encouraging news. Mortgage rates have actually come down lately. We're seeing 30-year fixed rates around 6.2, 6.3%. It's a nice shift from where we were a few months back when things were flirting with the high sevens. That dip is making a big difference in monthly payments for buyers, and there's a good bit of buzz happening. We're seeing more people applying for mortgages, which tells us confidence is starting to come back to the market. All of this points to a window of opportunity for buyers before the 2026 rush hits. If you've been on the fence, now might be a great time to explore what's possible. I'd love to help you run some numbers and see what fits. What happens is next year when rates fall, we start to go back to a little bit of a frenzy. Now, we're not going to go back to the savagely unhealthy market that we were in 21 and 22. And part of that is that the silver lining is that we've gotten back to about 836,000 existing homes on the market in the US right now. We got as low as 212,000 in the 2021 timeframe. That was just unsustainable. At 836,000, we're still low. Typically, we have 1.2 to 1.4 million, but about 8 out of 10 customers that come to the market will bring a home to the market. So that puts us in a position that even as home sales grow next year, inventory will still grow in alignment with that, and that we want to see that. If we're talking to our sellers, here's a couple of quotes. With more homes on the market than we've seen in the last few years, buyers, they have choices. But it also means sellers have to be smart. The good news is mortgage rates have come down, which is stirring up buyer activity. And buyers who are on the sidelines are starting to re-engage. In this kind of market, it's about being the best value. Clean presentation, smart pricing, and strong marketing are making all the difference. If we position your home thoughtfully, we can absolutely capture the attention of serious buyers, even with more listings out there. Timing is in your favor right now. I'd love to help you take advantage of it. And again, as mortgage demand grows, there's going to be buyers looking. And of course, as the market starts to heat up, you'll see more sellers coming to market. So if we just look at where does this take us for next year, probably long-term, we're looking at somewhere in the 5.5 to 5.875 on the back half of the year. And probably the front half of the year, we're going to be in that 6 range. I don't see a lot of data showing that we're going to be too much sub 6 with rate buy downs. Maybe some additional origination fees or points, you might be able to get down there, but that's kind of where we're looking. But it's important to note that's healthy. That's a really good place for us to be. And as long as we don't have any, major wars or any weird things that happen, we're probably going to see inflation continuing to cool and employment soften a little bit. And there we go. We're back in the game. So we've had the second highest increase in mortgage purchase applications since March of 2020. And when I look at the trend, you start to see how the 10-year treasury affects rates, and that affects mortgage purchase applications. So people that sit down with the loan originator, they fill out a 1003, they start the process. So you can see that this trend line through 2023 really bottomed out. As we got into 2024, we've had a lot of ups and downs, and it's followed right along with what the treasury market does. And yet, look at where we are here. That is some pretty big increases, and that's a smile for anyone with a mortgage mortgage license or a real estate license. If we zoom out and look at this a little bit differently, this is the Bankers Association, the purchase index summary. And this just is a measurement of how home buyers are applying for mortgages and how it translates into activity. And when we look at November of 2024, the index was sitting at 136, which is extraordinarily low. This year, we're sitting at 168.7. So that's a 24% increase year over year. Increase is spelled wrong. That is my dyslexia there. So here's the thing that you need to know. Anytime we're coming off of uber lows, percentage increases are dangerous numbers to track. And this is one that is actually a positive number in that this is a real number. We look back in history, the average index was 245 through the 90s until 2025. We had an all-time high in June of 2005, and that was right before the giant boom of construction was happening. We had a record low in December of 1990, and that was coming off of some very high inflation and some banking and economic challenges that we had in the 90s. So when we look at this, we're headed in the right direction. That's really good. And if we look at existing home sales, this is the last 10 years. And as I said, the 2015 through 2020 range, like things were really steady. We were in that 5.5. We were bumped up into the 6 million home sales through the COVID expansion. And boom, we dropped off like a cliff. So June of 2022 was the ground zero when everything slowed down and the housing market came to crash. So this is the challenge you feel. And yet, if you look over here at the very end, you can see we do have some increases happening, and that is really positive. So I want to switch gears. We always go through the county-specific data. And if I'm being really honest, this month, there wasn't a lot of change since last month. So I'm going to include all of that data in the presentation that I send out to you guys. And if you are a guest, you can message Kennedy or you can message McKenna and stick your email address in there, and they can make sure that you get a copy of this as well. But what I want to do is take a few moments. NAR released their 2025 profile of home buyers and sellers, and there's some really key data in there that help you to be able to understand how to position your business in this current market and in the year ahead. So I just want to walk through a few of these things. And before I really dive into this, I do want to say there is some data in here that is very, I'm going to call it weird. And the slides that I'm showing you are data that I feel pretty confident in. The data that I think was a little weird was the survey this year showed that the average age of a first-time buyer was well into their 40s. And I've seen a lot of press coverages online about, oh my word, the first-time buyer, you can't afford a house until you're in your 40s. By the way, your customers are hearing that also. But here's the challenge. The survey is 126 questions. They sent out, I forget how many surveys they sent out. It was a large number, and they only had 6% returned this year. Now, I don't know about you, but probably, let me just see here one second. I don't know about you, but our younger generation, the people that are buying in their 20s and the 30s, they're probably a little bit, and I got someone that's, Kennedy, will you watch and see? I think somebody came off mute accidentally. But I think that the data probably was a little bit skewed because you don't see 20 and 30-year-olds wanting to sit down and fill out a 126 question survey. I'm not even sure at 50 years old if I want to do that, but the boomers probably were a little more likely to fill that out. So when you hear that data with your customers, just use that as a little bit of an asterisk. But of all the people that bought last year, where did they come from? What were they doing before they bought a house in 2025? Well, 65% of them owned a house previously. And this statistic is really important. Only 24% of renters purchased this last year. And that's a really strong indication of that affordability challenge that we've had. It's interesting because there's a couple of themes in here that show up time and time again. And one is we are moving into a buyer's market. So working with buyers are still going to be a big part of the next 12 months of your business plan. However, because renters disproportionately make up a smaller percentage of the market, getting to the seller first means you get the buy side transaction. So it's going to be a year, it's going to be one of those weird years where you're really going to have to be good at both to succeed at a high level in this next year. 9% of people lived with a friend or relative, and 2% rented the home that they ultimately purchased. So they were probably rent to own at some level. Let's look at percentage of first-time buyers. This number is pretty solid. We're at 21%, and that is the lowest level since NAR began collecting data in 1981. This is where understanding financing, understanding 321 buy downs, understanding FHA and VA loans really comes in, because you can help buyers navigate. Oftentimes they actually can buy a home and they didn't even realize they could. So it's an interesting statistic. It's a little bit unfortunate, and it's, you know, it's reality that that we're in now. The Trump administration, I missed this on one of the slides. They have proposed mortgage portability, which I don't think will ever happen, but that would mean if you have a 3% interest rate, you can port that over to a new property. There's a lot of challenges and technical things behind the scenes. It would still be a unit per a loan originator's unit. So it would still be it doesn't take originators out of the equation, but there's some challenges. Trump has also proposed the 50-year mortgage, which also I don't think we need, and I don't think it'll happen. However, that would allow people to spread their payments out, and then as real wages increase, they could refinance into a 30-year or a 20-year, and that would take up the slack in that appreciation gap, or that with a 50-year you don't appreciate, or you don't build equity very fast. But it would let people get in. So it's an interesting concept. What did buyers use when they were looking for a home? Well, not surprisingly, 62% said the real estate agent was the number one source of valid information. 23% said that they were occasionally using it. Mobile search came up very high. If you look at that, that's almost 70% that used mobile search. Open house, 14%. Now, there's an interesting stat in here that I'll show you in a moment, but open house, 14% said they used open houses frequently, and then 34% said regularly. So that's 48%, almost 1 out of 2 used open house. Open house is still a fantastic lead generation strategy. What was the first step that they took during the home buying process? And this was kind of an interesting one. Of all buyers, not surprisingly, they looked online. 46% went to online search first. What I thought was interesting was only 30% of first-time buyers went online, 50% of repeat buyers. So you've got a little bit of a change in there. But when you come down here, let's see if I can pull this up for you. 16% of first-time buyers, is number 3, looked online for information about the home buying process. This is where your TikTok videos, your YouTube videos, this is where your direct mail to neighborhoods, prospecting to your farms that are rental farms. They're looking for information. They're curious. They don't know what they don't know, and they want help. And whether it's home buyer seminars, whatever that is, I see opportunity in that number. Number 2 is contacted a real estate agent. 20%, 1 out of 5 did. Little higher for repeat buyers. Talked with a friend or relative about the home buying process. So good old mom or dad or a friend. And then it goes down from there. Now, if we look at this in a little different, information sources used in the home search by first time and repeat buyers. All buyers, it's not surprising, the agent has still remained at the center of the transaction. 85% of buyers said, hey, the real estate agent was a valuable source. Pretty similar across first time and repeat. Mobile search was up there. I made a little note on this. Open house, 48% of all first and resale buyers said open house was one of their primary information sources. So I still say one of the best lead generation tactics you could do is hold hold an open house 5 days a week, go set up at a house somewhere. You can work there from 10 to 5 if you need to, do all of your other work there, and set the goal to meet 2 people that can walk through that door that you can put into your database. Online video site was really high also, 52%. So this is where your YouTube, this is where having really good looking video of your listings matters, your drone photography. And then it kind of drops off from there. Now, how long does it take for the average buyer to search for a home? So for especially new agents coming in, this is really critical, but I think it's also important when you're doing your buyer consultation to kind of set the stage of this is a typical time frame and this would be a long time frame. The average is about 10 weeks, and that's really down a little bit from that 2007 to really 2013, 2014, where it was about 12 weeks. So somewhere in the neighborhood of about 2.5-ish months the buyer spends start to finish looking, which goes right back to, we say what you do today shows up 90 days from now. And if you prospect and get the lead, this is where that data comes from. Let's talk about where buyers found the home that they purchased. And this is kind of interesting. 52% said they found the home on the internet. Now, what this data doesn't tell me was that the internet, as in they received an auto prospector from their agent? I don't know the answer to that. But 52% said the internet and 27% said the real estate agent. That's what, 50, 60, 70, 80. That's 80%. Those are the two sources. When it comes to pricing your listings, I think it's important to have this slide in there because your pricing matters and just simply being out there matters. Having your property be findable. Yes, all the other things that we do to price and market properties is important, and being the cheerleader for the listing. But buyers care that it's well priced on the internet and that they get access to it. 9% found it through a friend or a relative, 4% through home builders or the builder's agent. I thought that was an interesting statistic. That was a small number relative to probably our market's a little higher, but relative to the US. And 4% bought directly from the seller. So for sale by owner or a other less than arm's length transaction. This one's interesting. The value of the website features. What did buyers say they wanted in what did buyers say that they wanted in their website? Number one was photos, and photos overwhelmingly. Detailed information about the property. Number three was interesting, floor plans. They wanted to be able to understand how did the house flow. 38% said virtual tours were really high, and when you look at both somewhat useful and very useful, that's almost 90%. I mean, 40. That's close to 80% there are saying virtual tours are really important. When we keep going down, they wanted neighborhood information. And I thought this was interesting. They wanted detailed information about recently sold properties. So the consumer's paying attention to what did the neighbor down the block sell for and how does that affect the valuation? Virtual open houses, virtual listing appointments, and real estate news were at the very bottom of the barrel. So those have kind of gone away a little bit. They're still there, but not as much as they were through the 2020 to 2022 range. Now, this one has some really important data in it. And especially, I think there's a couple slides in here that apply really to new real estate agents, people new to the industry. So what did buyers want most from their agent, both first time and repeat buyers? 50% said, hey, I just want to help find the right home. I just want you to understand my needs and then go show me the things that really fit and be my eyes and ears in the marketplace. 13% said, I want to help negotiate the terms of the sale. But only 7% said, I want help with the paperwork. I think this is what I drew from this. I know that, especially as a new agent, one of the big fears is I'm going to fill out a paper wrong or I'm going to do something wrong with the paperwork. And that is valid fear. That's a valid concern. I want you to know that. But negotiations and helping to find the right home, which means knowing your market and being able to study negotiation skills, those two together are like 60 to 70% of what they're looking for. So just know that, yes, it's important to have a good working knowledge of that contract, but it's not about the contract. It's about your skills in helping them to execute in the marketplace. 5% said helping them determine how much they can afford. It was 11% for first-time buyers, so that's an important one. Then everything else kind of fell below that. We look at the benefits that were provided by the real estate agent during the home purchase process for both first-time and repeat. This one's interesting. 54% of all buyers said one of the benefits was that the agent pointed out unnoticed features and or faults with the property. This is where you never want to be the home inspector, but it's important for you to really understand property condition and be able to kind of have a little bit of a sense of what does an old or an aging water heater look like? What does an aging AC unit look like? If you see, what are the signs of settling cracks? And this is where a partnership with a really good home inspector and going out in the field and even shadowing some home inspections with another agent comes in. That's huge value to your career and also to the consumers. 52% said, I just want help understanding the process. And for first-time buyers, that number was 76%. So the question I ask on this is, do you have a process that you can sit down and say, here's my process of how I work with you as a buyer? I was a computer science guy. I mapped it out with kind of a flow chart, and that became my blueprint of how I worked with a buyer. 44% said they provided a better list of service providers. So your network of other resources were highly valuable to the buyers. Being able to improve the search areas and knowing your neighborhoods and knowing what those amenities look like. And then 35% said negotiated a better price. But the interesting part is that's only 1 out of 3. So 2 out of 3 valued other things above that. And it kind of goes down from there. Where did buyers find the real estate agent, both first time and repeat? There's some interesting statistics in here. Of all buyers, 43% were referred by or was a friend, neighbor, or relative. That's almost 1 out of 2. And for first time buyers, it was 1 out of 2. This is where your database matters. This is where building that database to 500, 800, 1,000 met contacts, you start to get that 5 to 10% rate of return, which means you've got 50 to maybe 80 units a year that you're doing from that database. This is where those customers are living at. 15% used the agent that they had used previously. That number is really, really low. Now, I think that's an indication. Some people say that's an indication that the agent didn't stay in contact. And I don't disagree with that. But the reality is 30% of our industry turns over every year. So it may be just that those agents are no longer in the business, unfortunately. 7% inquired about a specific property that they viewed online. So we did make the conversion from an internet lead to an appointment, but 7% is pretty low. That's where all of the pay-per-click and the online avenues, they do have a return, but they're a lot lower. If you're going to get a 5 times return by managing a database than being in an online pay-per-click campaign, I would pick database. And then everything else kind of continued to go down there. 5% visited an open house and met an agent. I think it's interesting that 49% said they used open houses, but only 5% met their agent at an open house. And I think that is an opportunity for agents to have better conversion skills at the open house and be able to ask what I teach as open-ended questions. It's where you open and you go, where are you from? What are you looking for? Who's looking? And you start down that process. I think that's a gap and an opportunity for our agents. How many times did buyers contact the agent before they received a response? I was actually happy about this. 26% said they made a phone call and the agent called back. 23% said they talked to him in person. 17% were a referral. The median number of times they had to make contact with the agent was just 1. So speed to lead matters, but I really expected this number to be a little higher. But that's also an indication that the agents that got back quickly, they get the business. So answer the phone. That's the message. Answer the phone. I know we live in an age where very few people answer their phone. So I know what that's like in the field these days. The number of real estate agents that the customer interviewed by first time and repeat buyers, 74% of buyers chose the first agent they met with, 76% of repeat buyers, and only, that's what, 90%? 90% of them only met with two agents. So getting in front of the customer first, your database, your open house strategies, your geographical farming, catching them in the moment that they're ready to do something, that's the key. The importance of agent communication, I thought this was really a key one also. By the way, there were, I think, 128 pages of data in here, and we'll touch on a few of those in upcoming months. But 72% of all buyers said that the thing that they valued the most was calling personally to inform them of activities. Now, I thought it was interesting because the same percentage gave weight to sending property information and communicating via text messaging. I thought those numbers would be a little different, and that may be a mixture of, if this survey was skewed a little bit towards boomers, maybe I would expect that to be different, and yet, it's the same. So they're saying, hey, call me or text me. Either way, I feel good if you're communicating with me. The third one was interesting. Sends listings as soon as the property is listed or the price change. This is where you have to be a student of the market, and it's really imperative for you to have auto prospector searches set up both for your customer and for yourself, and to spend part of your morning as a part of your lead conversion, lead follow-up, looking through the MLS and looking through the new listings. And I can't tell you the number of times that we would see a listing and we'd call the client and say, hey, what you're looking for just hit the market. We need to get right out there. And if we left it to them to find it, they might not look at that for 2 or 3 days. So be their eyes and ears, and they value that. That's really clear. Sends me emails about specific needs. So anticipating what the customer is going to need next was a huge part of that. And then having a website was only 29%. Thought that was interesting. They don't really care about your website. They care that you care and that you communicate. Would buyers use the real estate agent again, or would they recommend them to others? This is that gap that exists. 76% said they would absolutely use their real estate agent again, and yet it was, I forget what was the number, 9% actually did. It was a single digit number. It was very low. 15% said probably, and 9% said didn't have a good experience. So that's where professionalism comes in. This is a really important one. This is where the data is changing on our database return. So the median seller tenure. So how long is the typical seller in their home? We used to see it toggling between 6 and 7 years. That was very common until we hit about that 2008, 2010 range. It has been climbing. Now, some of that's affordability. Some of that may be aging population. And yet we're at 11 years on average right now. That is a really high time frame, and that's where you've seen your database returns going from 12 to 2, which is what was in the MREA. So for every 12 names in your database, you do 2 pieces of business a year, to closer to a 5% rate of return. That's important because that means we need more met contacts in our database in order to get more referrals and more customers that are selling in any given year. So pay attention to that. I'm going to just share a couple of local housing market trends with you for the Tri-County area, just so that you've got a little bit of a perspective on what's happening. I'm still going to include all of the additional inventory trends, everything else that we typically send out. I'm going to include those in there. Generally speaking, inventory is still growing. We're still moving a little bit more towards a buyer's market in most counties, and I'll walk you through a couple of scripts and some data on this. But if there's a silver lining, it's this. So this is our year-over-year pendings. This information comes from Altos data, and Altos tracks every listing that's actually available in every market every single day of the year. So versus the NAR data that can be anywhere from 1 to 3 months old when it gets released, this is literally data from last Friday. Pending home sales in Charlotte County, which is the slowest of all of our counties right now. Charlotte is seeing average days on the market over 180 days, and condos are above 200 days currently. So those are starting to be longer time frames. But the good news is this year's pendings are above 2022. 2023, and 2024. And that's a sign that whether you want to call it pent-up demand or the affordability factor is starting to shake loose. When we look back to the last 3 calendar years, there's been anywhere from 1.2 million to about 1.7 million home sales that should have occurred that did not. And what that means is we have an entire year's worth of existing home sales that are sitting on the sidelines, and they're just waiting to get back in the market. So I always liken it to a kinked hose. You kink the hose, it slows to a trickle, and when you unkink the hose, you get this giant burst that comes out. When the rates and the affordability and everything settles, that's what we're going to see is this giant burst of activity. Whether that's going to be the second half of 2026, whether that's going to be early 2027, I think for sure we'll be in that by 27. We still may have another 3, 6, 9 months of a little bit of a more challenging market before things shoot out of the gate. I wish I could say something different, but kind of feels like that's where we may be. But we're trending upward, and that's the good news. So if we talk about Charlotte County, I'm just going to give you a kind of a way to interpret this, and it's this. Charlotte County is like a calm lake that used to be a river. It was moving super fast, and all of a sudden, it's just kind of sitting there very calm. On the surface, it looks like a weak seller's market. The data still shows our market index is 30, which anything above 30 means it's a seller's market. Below 30 means it's a buyer's market, and 30 it's pretty balanced in there. However, if you look below that, the demand is softening, homes are sitting longer, and sellers are having to price aggressively if they want action, especially in the condo market. And I know that I happen to live in a condo myself. The Keystone inspection rules, the insurance costs after multiple hurricanes, my monthly dues I think we're at 4 times what we were when we bought in 2019. So that's an affordability factor. Buyers, on the other hand, have negotiation room, even in single family properties, and especially on homes with longer days on the market. So the longer the home sits, the more market stale it gets, and the more room the buyers have. Sarasota County, a little bit of a different picture. We're just kind of moving north here. The Sarasota County year-over-year pendings as of last Friday, we are trending well above 2022, 2023, and 2024. And remember, 2022, the first half was a boom year. Then June of 2022 hit, and then it screeched to a halt. So this is a really positive sign. And if you notice, we're in the 4th quarter and it's starting to trend upward. So we're going to keep watching that, but that's a positive sign. We just want to see that keep moving in the right direction. Sarasota, it's a little bit of a mixed bag. Sarasota sellers are now competing with more listings than they've seen in multiple years. And it's no longer just about listing and getting multiple offers. It's about standing out. Pricing over the market is getting punished. So if you misprice, I know Heather taught shift tactic 7 today, so I hope you guys all attended. But your pricing strategy matters more than it has in a long time. So this is where you really have to get good at interpreting the data and really walking the seller through what I teach as the listing life cycle. Lori said it was a great class. Thank you, Lori. The listing life cycle, to understand that price reductions are a part of the marketing strategy right from day one. Buyers, on the other hand, are feeling empowered, especially in the condo market, and sellers have to earn their attention. So they have to be well priced and well positioned. And as Wayne says, we have a money slide every month, and I'm going to show that here in a moment. But if you price it right, things are going away fast. If you overprice, the market does punish you, no question. Manatee County, a little bit different. Of course, Manatee County, we have a lot of new construction in there, so that can change the dynamics just a little bit, but we're trending above 2024 numbers. We're still below 2022 and 2023 numbers. This is in the year-over-year pendings. And we look at Manatee County, just some talking points, market-ready talking points. Manatee home sellers are still holding on to peak pricing expectations, but buyers aren't quite playing along. Demand is soft. Homes that feel overpriced or dated, they're just sitting. The market is highly price sensitive. If you're not coming out of the gate with pricing strategy, you're losing valuable momentum. For buyers, this is the county where they can push back the hardest and negotiate, especially on listings with multiple price drops. So the data is showing us that if it overprices, the buyer is they're going to take advantage of that. And this is what that looks like. So when we look at homes that came to the marketplace, did not need to take a price reduction. So they were well priced, which probably means they were well positioned. Doesn't mean they were the best condition. It just means the value was good for the price that was on it. In October, the well-priced listings took an average of 29 days to get an offer, and they sold for 95% of the original price. There was about a 5% negotiation room. If a seller overpriced, and this is where I say the market is punishing overpricing pretty hard. They overpriced, they had to take one or more price reduction. That means that the average home took 141 days to get an offer, and they sold at 85% of the original price. And in a prior month period, we did the math, and it meant that the additional room that they negotiated was about 10% more off the price than where they actually were at on their original price. But this is one of those numbers I'd have in my listing presentations. I mean, if you've got to vacuum the carpets, clean the dishes out of the sink, get the kids out of the house, take the dog to the park, drive around until the showing happens, they're running late, all those types of things. If you have to do that for 30 days versus 5 months, I'm going to pick the 30 days. This is where convenience actually has a dollar value associated with it. So future pacing your sellers when they're not wanting to price where you're wanting to price at, where you're explaining to them that they're at. This is where you have the opportunity to just explain, hey, look, this is what happens. If we miss the mark and we overprice, we're going to have some pain. I always take the moment to ask the question, can we ever underprice a house? And the reality is you can't. If you price something really aggressive, you'll get multiple offers and it'll sell fast. And in an auction, people bid the price up. When you overprice, the only thing that happens is they bid the price down. So Mr. or Mrs. Seller, which direction would we like to be in? And I think that's an important part of that discussion. So use this data, put this in your listing presentation. The data source on this is Broker Metrics, all residential sales in the Tri-County area. So this applies across all 3 counties. So with that said, I will include the national housing market slides in there. So you will get all of the data on where we are in the national level. And I'm just going to show you this real quick. We are currently sitting right now at about 800. I said 836 earlier. We're at about 836,000. Historically, we're about 1.2 to 1.4 million. So that gives you a sense of where we've got the opportunity to go nationally to be able to see us get back to a more stable, more healthy market. And all of those slides will be included in the PDF that I sent out. So what does all this mean? It means adapt your business to the market of the moment. Your negotiation skills matter. Your pricing skills matter for listings at a really high level. And this is the opportunity for you to really re-engage your database. We're about to see a really big influx of buyers, of transactions, of people that have been on those sidelines. Maybe they've had an extra kid and they just haven't, they've lived with 1 bedroom less, or they've been working from the little corner in the closet instead of an actual office. Those people, they're going to be in the market. We're going to see them returning. And I just want you all to be positioned to be in front of them when they're ready to buy, sell, or invest so that you can take your unfair share. So with that said, that's where we are this month. We will watch very closely over the next 30 days what's happening. And as always, if you have questions or if you have something that you want us to touch on in an upcoming call, just don't hesitate to let us know. We'll make sure we explain that. McKenna, Kennedy, any questions? Anyone ask anything that? we needed to touch on?
No, people said that they really loved the slide where you talked about what buyers are saying nowadays, and Wayne says that he strongly agrees about today's class and the money slide, and that today's market updates are top notch.
Well, good. We appreciate that. Wayne, it looks like you had a question.
And
You're still there. You go. You're almost off.
all right. Thank you for taking my call. Question: I love that money slide so much. Is there a chance that could be broken for condo versus single family home?
Sure. Yeah,
Oh,
I will absolutely do that. I'll make a note and send that out. That's a great, and I'll make a note for that in the future also.
beautiful. Because you break that for the days on market, and right now condos in our markets are 10 months supply versus homes around 4. So, man, having that money slide broken for condos would be really, really good.
Yeah,
Thank you.
great. Thank you for that, Wayne. That's great. And I love that you always watch the numbers. You study the market, so you know the trends, and that gives you an advantage. Very good. All right.
Wayne's a system guy through and through.
That's it. Very good. Well, guys, I want to thank you for your time. The greatest gift you can give is your time. And I know that this is a little bit of a dry topic sometimes, and yet it's really important to be able to master. So I encourage you, go study the numbers, go put these in your listing presentations, and go succeed in your business. We appreciate all of you.